I'd like to start my presentation just by asking a really simple question. How many people in here have seen a hockey game, either on TV or in person? What's your favorite part, or most interesting part of a hockey game?
I just like how there's action all the time.
Anybody else?
The goals seem pretty extreme, I guess.
All right, well, one of the biggest parts is actually, and most controversial parts, is the fighting in hockey. And I want to touch on the role of fighting in hockey just by giving a brief summary of the history of fighting in hockey, the rules and regulations, and the pros and cons to keeping fighting in the game. Fighting has been around since the NHL started. According to NHL.com, the NHL started in 1917, and fighting was allowed and regulated starting in 1917, and still to this day is regulated. They've met many times to discuss, the general managers tend to get together and have met many times to discuss whether it should still be allowed in the game. A quote by the Vancouver general manager, Mike Gills, was that they've looked at statistics and there's been 24,000 plus fights as of March 2009 in the NHL, and none of these fights have given reason to amend the rule. They see it as even good for the game. Part of the deep history of fighting in hockey is that they have actually signed enforcers, people to actually fight in hockey, for almost the sole purpose. They're not signed to score goals, they're just signed to fight. Merriam-Webster actually gave enforcers their own dictionary, or their own definition in reference to hockey. They're known for their rough play in their fighting. They're not known for anything else. Nowadays, these enforcers, though, due to new rules and regulations, are basically on ice to protect their star players, to protect their skill players, make sure they're not hurt, make sure there's no cheap shots towards their skill players. Some of the fighters in the day were that lovely gentleman on the left, Rob Ray, Ty Dome, on the left here, and Donald Brashear, who's one of the ones that are still around today. They're actually a dying breed, though, based off of new rules and regulations in the league. One of the basic rules is that if you fight, most fights are actually agreed upon. They actually say, "Would you like to fight?" And then after the fight, sometimes they say "good job" to each other. They're kind of staged sometimes. In cases like that where both agree to fight, it's just 5-minute majors to each person, and game goes on as played. It's still 5-on-5. In 1977, though, according to QNHL.com, they added a new rule called the third man in rule. And the third man in rule, according to First Base Sports, says that if a third man interjects a fight, which is meant to be one-on-one, that player gets a game misconduct and is ejected from the game, and nowadays actually faces further suspensions and everything. And this rule has been said to cut down from what used to be they had bench clearance brawls all the time, and it was kind of out of control. Now it's seen as a more civilized kind of game. They also added the instigator penalty, which says that if you are to start a fight, it's not like an agreeable fight and you just kind of cheap shot someone. You get an additional 2-minute penalty, which may not seem much, but it could cause your team to lose the game. I'd like to briefly touch on just the pros and cons. I'm not trying to convince anybody either way, but there's been a few lists out. There's been many reasons to keep fighting in the game. USA Today released pros and cons to keeping fighting in the game. One of the theories to keep this fighting is actually, which may not make sense completely, but it says that it eliminates dirty play. It eliminates injuries, because they say that so the sport is so aggressive that if you take out fighting, there will be so much built up frustration and anger that there will be these cheap shots and things that lead to more injuries than actually a sanctioned fight. Also, they think that tough guys, these enforcers, are a big part of the game, and they don't want to lose. They don't want to lose this part of the game. It's been in their tradition for the 93 years that the NHL has existed. And InfoPlease.com says that the fighting is good to protect these skilled players. these skilled players need some kind of protection, especially with the size of some of the players today. If it wasn't for them, then who knows what would happen. Arguments against fighting is basically about image, improved national image, more drawing power. It would be family friendly. Some families look at it as a negative thing, and it's kind of I don't know. It's frowned upon, and it's good for business. It would be good for businesses and endorsements because the NHL actually has lost a lot of endorsements because of keeping fighting around. Either way, I'm not trying to convince you either way. Both sides have a very valuable point and can be argued for a long time. Whether you agree with it or not, it's not my purpose. I just wanted to inform you a little bit more about the role of fighting in the NHL, and hopefully it doesn't seem as barbaric and makes a little bit more sense. Thank you.